Welcome to the Mind and Clip Theology podcast, hosted by Miriam Pease and Amy Patton, which come out of the Canadian Journal of Theology, Mental Health, and Disability.
We both live and work on lands that have been homes and remain homes to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Neutral, and the Ojibwe Chippewa peoples and other peoples who have cared for the land.
We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land and are mindful of the need to repair broken covenants.
This podcast is an opportunity to model how faith communities can engage in theological and spiritual conversations around madness and cryptness.
If you need a full transcript, you can find our videos on our YouTube channel.
We want to say before we begin that topics and conversations we are raising throughout our time together are often hard.
They are hard for mad and quick people ourselves, and hard for our families and loved ones.
So do what you need to do to take care of yourselves, your bodies, minds, and hearts.
And now, here is our episode.
So, welcome all. It is a beautiful Friday afternoon, and we are so happy to be here, all of us together. Today, there's four of us here on the Mad and Crypt Theology podcast: Miriam Spees, myself, Amy Penton, Robbie Walker, and Laura McGregor. So, we're so glad to be here with you. And we decided that we wanted to have some roundtable talks that we would be doing every once in a while, just to bring a bit more to the conversation. And also we wanted to be able to share some more of ourselves with you, our listeners. We've had some feedback that our listeners want to hear more from us, and so here we are. So we decided today that we would talk a little bit about our own stories, and also we have a few questions that we want to try to unpack together. So I think, Miriam, is there anything else you want to say as we are getting started?
No, wait to have you here and look forward to hearing your stories after you listen to this or watch this.
So today, as we were, just to get us started, we were talking a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, about this idea of why are we doing the work that we're doing? And Laura put forth this idea that, is it possible we could all be reluctant theologians in some way? And so, Laura, I wonder if I can invite you to say a little bit more about why you think reluctant theologian is a good title that you gave yourself. So would you like to get us started?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for including me in this conversation today. I'm excited to explore these ideas with all of you amazing people. Yeah, reluctant theologian. I think the term absolutely describes my experience and my story. I often say, if you had asked me whether I would do work in theology or I would be teaching at a theological school a few years ago or a decade or two ago, I would have laughed very hard, actually. I started out in the health sciences. I was an occupational therapist. I was a PhD student in the health sciences. I did not see myself in this world at all, despite the fact that I look at it now and feel very happy in this world. But I think my story is I had an existential crisis of faith, and I got really, really angry at God. And the only way I knew how to make sense of it was to try to make sense of it. And that involved registering for master's level courses in theology. Originally, I was just going to take some interest courses. The idea that it became an MA and then a PhD sort of unfolded. So I feel like there was no intention in this journey to become a theologian. It just happened, it unfolded. And even today, I sort of shake my head and I'm hesitant to call myself a theologian. So reluctant, uncomfortable, I think all of those words would describe my story. I'd be curious to hear your stories.
Robbie, do you want to jump in and tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. So I was sitting in a Systematics 1 class, which was based on the Apostles' Creed, and I was 18 years old. And the very first thing that the professor said to us after we sat down on the very first day, Monday morning at 8:30, God help us. And he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, all of you are theologians. The question is whether you are a good one." And he had me right there. I was like, I'm interested. And by the end of that semester, it was very clear that I wanted to be an academic theologian. As part of my call to ordained ministry. So that was a trajectory that I was not at all reluctant about, but my story is that after leaving that particular institution, I came out as queer, like I came out as a gay man. And having grown up Pentecostal, this immediately puts me, and living with cerebral palsy, immediately puts me in, I feel like a particle of radium in almost every room that I walk into for whatever reason. And so I guess that reluctant theologian in terms of some of the spaces that I feel called to be in, like arguing with Pentecostal academic theologians about queerness, or arguing with Pentecostal pastors about queerness. Do I want to be in that space? Yes, I absolutely want to be in that space because people are being harmed. Is it easy? Not a chance in hell, you know? And so in that sense, it's like, this is my vocation and I have the energy to do it, but it's so hard. And there are days I'd rather stop fighting, you know? Because sometimes I do view it as a fight. So I think reluctant theologian can apply, even though being a theologian was something that I embrace quite joyfully.
And for me, I'm not sure I would call myself a theologian, although I do in my bio, I name myself as a quick theologian. I'm hoping to fake it until it happens. But I initially went into journalism, and then I traveled to Palestine as well, where I had a beginning typical. That's a long story. So I ended up at Emmanuel College for my MDiv and during my if I was convinced that my cerebral palsy didn't matter for ministry and that I would be ordained no problem because I'm so stubborn and can problem solve anything. And then when ordination, I was ordained, but ordination was quite challenging for me. As there were not opportunities for me to serve. So I fell into a deep depression and was suicidal. And after some treatment, thank God, I became more aware of my CP. So after like 25 years of living with CP, I started recognizing that it mattered for my life and how I was in the world. So then I started investigating disability theology and found that most of it was written by able-bodied people and by able-bodied men in particular. And that's well and good for lots of reasons, but I found voices were missing and their voice wasn't helping me practice ministry. So then I turned it to PhD work to hopefully help the church think about if we want to support leaders with disabilities or other marginalized leaders. What do we need to do as a church to ensure safety, ensure human rights are honored, and so until figuring what that might look like, but I was reluctant to do it because it's not actually my work to do alone, it's the church's work. However, I'm hoping to give the church some tools so that I can lead and other people can offer ministry.
Thanks, Miriam. And Robbie, if you're listening to this, Robbie's clapping. So thanks so much for sharing, Miriam. I was thinking about this question a lot this week, reflecting on it. And I think for me, I grew up with really shitty theology. I grew up with, I know I've heard Robbie say this before, the term testosterone theology, and I think it really resonates with what I grew up with, which was God. It's weird sometimes. I have this like weird thing where I can remember songs from when I was little, and I was thinking about the song the other day. I used to sing in Sunday school, and the words are, "My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do." And it goes on and on. But I grew up with a God who was very powerful and very, I think, in some ways distant, but also very present in some ways for me. And I grew up in the Pentecostal church, so Robbie and I have some resonances there. And I left the church for a long time. When I was around 18, 19, I was like, I don't fit here. I can't squeeze myself into this box that I feel like the church wants me to be in. And I kind of did that whole thing of like, trying to figure out, is your parents' religion for you? And I've come back in some ways to quote unquote organized religion through the academy. My mentors here at Toronto School of Theology, I feel, have really stood in the gap for me in a lot of ways and helped me to see God in a new way, and also feel like I'm wanted as a part of the larger conversation of like what the heck we're doing, I don't know, with the journal, or just like that God didn't see me as like a broken piece of garbage. God sees me as like a semi-functioning human. And I guess for me, my own story is, mental illness runs in my family. And my own story is I've had a journey with a lot of anxiety. I've also have a diagnosis of OCD. And so I think part of what I really want to do with some of my work is one of the questions that I have is, is there room for somebody like me in the larger conversation that theology is having right now? And is there room for others like me who don't have it all together, who've struggled, and who are looking for a home? I think my journey away from the church and then kind of back to it has made me feel like a refugee. And I've heard a lot of other people who grew up in sort of like the more traditional evangelical, or even what's the word, very conservative churches, especially women, feel this way. And I'm very, very blessed to have an awesome therapist who she works with women who have come out, or like I use the word survived, very conservative Christian upbringings. So I'm really blessed to have her in my life, and to be able, she's somebody who walks with me at this time. And I'm just today, I just want to say I do not have it all together. So I'm just a person who's wandering, trying to figure out my way as well. And I think that the journal has become a way that, I know Miriam and I have talked about this before, it's a way that we've, and doing this podcast too, it's been a way for us to sort of figure out what our voice is and be able to like contribute in new ways to the current theological conversation that's going on. Yeah, and trying to bust out a little bit of the academic silos that we can get shoved in when we start moving through academia. So yeah, and I think just to circle back to the reluctant theologian question, I think this is a good sort of name for me as well. And my reluctance comes from my own struggle with social anxiety. And so for me, I am reluctant to speak, and it's been hard for me to find my voice over the years, but I feel like I'm getting there. I'm getting there, and maybe I do have something to say finally. So yeah, that's how I feel about that question. So yeah.
I just feel so many resonances between the stories in my own experience. Like Miriam talking about I heard you say that part of your ministry is you would love to give the church tools so that ministry becomes a thing that everybody does. Everybody has a ministry, and having tools to hand people. You can use this. You don't have to treat all tools are not hammers, and everything is not a nail. And so here's a toolbox, and I really resonate with that. And not having it together. And I call Amy, I heard you use the term refugee, and I talk about feeling like I'm in exile. Because if I go to, and I still do sometimes, like if I'm on holiday or whatever, I go back to my people that I grew up with, and there's still so much resonance, except that I am not welcome there as I am. I am not home, you know, and I wish I could go home still, you know, after unpacking all the shitty theology and trauma and blah, 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 there's still a piece in me that says, I want to go home. And in Laura's story, the sense of, oh, I'm here. I didn't expect to be here. And sort of it unfolds, but it's certainly unfolded in a much different direction than I was expecting, because goodness, if I had been according to the path that I thought I was gonna, I probably would still be an out gay man, just as gimpy as ever, you know, but I would have probably had to leave conservative church jobs after getting married and having kids, and then realizing that, oops, the reparative therapy didn't work. And what is this that I'm in a tradition that really values bodily healing, and I still live with CP, and you know, these sorts of things. Or I'm anxious, but people are clinically anxious even, but people are gaslighting me about, isn't that what normal people experience, quote unquote normal people, whatever that is, you know. So I just resonate so much with what everybody's saying in different ways. So thanks. It's so good to hear testimonies, as my Pentecostal friends say.
Hallelujah.
So, hallelujah. Yeah, I was like, Amy, you're still using language sometimes out of the Pentecostal tradition.
Yes.
It's really it's sort of the
in your bodies.
It is.
Yes.
It is.
Have
I think
you been able to find places that feel like home? Probably.
Mostly. I think home, I've realized, is where people I love are, not necessarily location, even in a metaphorical sense. You know, my therapist several weeks ago, she has a talent for asking what I call nosy questions in very gentle ways. Yes, yes. But there's this running joke about, oh, there's another nosy question. And she said, what is your relationship to place? And I said, complicated, but the question has stayed with me for several months, because I think it's a really important one. I still feel like I'm mostly home in a few places, and there was one community that I was part of that the actual institutional apparatus imploded. And so I'm still sort of grieving the collapse of an organization called Generous Space
Right.
because they were the people I was like, if this was a church planting organization, I would be the first person on the list for ordination, because I can bring 99.8% of myself to this space and nobody bats an eye. You know, so I have found home and sometimes lost it again. So it's, yeah. So.
Mm.
The academics are all thinking.
Like, we can edit the dead air.
No, I'm not editing any of the stories.
I think my reluctance also, like, I'm listening to these stories and yeah, there's a lot of overlap. A lot of your experiences, I feel, connect with mine. So I don't have a disability, but I was the mother of a child with profound physical and intellectual disabilities who also was considered medically fragile for 21 years until he passed away. So my encounters with the church were largely through the lens of caregiving and being the mother of a child with disability. And it's interesting, sort of, I think part of my reluctance is it stems back to an anger that at times borders on barely contained fury. So when I say I got angry with God, I you know, put that on testosterone. Like, it was a pretty deep-seated anger.
Yeah.
And I would include the church in that. In fact, maybe my anger was even more directed at the church, because what I heard was what I sort of linked to a lot of the sort of Vanier type theology of society theology of, you know, your journey with your child with intellectual disabilities will be life-changing. It will allow you to become more deeply connected to your own humanity or your own spirituality. And there was so much that was deeply toxic about that, not the least of which is it depersonalized my son and made him some theological muse for me.
Instrumental to your own progress as a person.
Exactly.
Like,
and discounted the embodied suffering that he lived with for many of those years. And so I had this burning white hot rage at times directed at God and the church and the voices that then spoke to me, but then didn't allow me to speak back. So when I tried to correct them and say, oh, I don't actually agree with your theology, or I have problems with what you're suggesting, I found that I was often on the receiving end of these very condescending and patronizing messages that say, oh, you don't understand yet. Don't worry, keep doing what you're doing and it will all make sense. And you will come to realize our theology is correct. And I felt deeply silenced. And so I think part of becoming a theologian, though I still don't always, I struggle with that term being applied to me, was because it was the only way I could give voice to this anger and throw it back at the church and say, I disagree with you. So here's a way I'm allowed to disagree with you. It was some sort of socially acceptable way to be angry at God and the church and say, okay, please listen to me. It was a way of finding my own voice.
So much of what I encounter in my own background, Laura, is you are not allowed to have the authority to tell your own story. We are the ones who understand. We are the ones who will tell you exactly how this is going to go. And God help you if you invoke the I, you know, the as in I am like this, or I believe this, because you could be, you know, John Milton's Satan, for lack of a better way to put it, that, you know, the person who says I is the one most capable of resisting the will of God, right? And this is the sort of ethos that I grew up with. And so, yeah, having the opportunity to resist and say, no, my voice and my experience and my pain and the way my body is, even if you don't have a disability, there are so many people in the church that I think the white hot anger is, I am not allowed to speak in my own voice. And this is fundamentally unfair and unjust. So I'm sitting here listening, and there's this productive energy sort of rising up through my stomach and my chest, right? So my heart feels hot right now listening to folks.
Yeah, I came across this quote by Bell Hooks this summer, and I have it on my desktop, so I see it every day. I think it says a lot of what we're talking about here. He was, no need to hear your voice when I can talk about you better than you can speak about yourself. No need to hear your voice. Only tell me about your pain. I want to know your story, and then I will tell it back to you in a new way. Tell it back to you in such a way that it has become mine, my own. Rewriting you, I write myself anew. I am still author authority. I am still the colonizer, the speaking subject, and you are now at the center of my talk. And I think this anger that we're naming, like, I'm even reluctant to be angry. That's something I'm working on with my therapist. But it's like, I know anger can be powerful and seeking justice. I don't want my joy to be dismissed as an angry joy, as someone seeking compensation or seeking whatever. You know, I want, if I'm going to tell my story to the church, I want it not to be used in a condescending way. Not that I have control over that once I tell my story, but I guess I'm in a different position, being able to tell that story. So I'm privileged in that way. But there's whole thing about being angry and also loving the church. It's a tension I live with.
Yeah, that whole paradox. This idea of anger, I'm finding really interesting to listen to. You know, and also your comment about the original sort of authors of disability theology, and I would argue also sort of disability and caregiving,
Yeah.
were very much able-bodied men. And I know that I looked in vain at times for the voices of mothers and couldn't find them. And then this whole idea of the angry mother and how you're so quickly dismissed. You're the hysterical, angry mother, and your voice is not taken seriously. And I can tell stories of sitting in seminars being told by men that I didn't understand my own maternal anger or my own maternal stories. And that they could, the Bell Hooks quote, I think I'm going to need to go find it and put it on my computer screen, because like it really spoke to me, this idea that many times men in authority in the church would tell me my story and inform me of where God was in my story. And you know, this my work, my reluctant theological work, is about trying to reclaim my story, take ownership of my anger, and call the church to account at some level.
Speaking as someone who is perceived unambiguously as a cisgender male, it's been part of my own journey to realize how often men who look like me, white colonial settlers, especially if we're British, you know, and we've been writing all the textbooks and preaching most of the sermons, etc., and realizing that even though in weird ways, because I'm disabled and queer, I'm feminized and infantilized, like people treat me like a child or like a woman. Not that that's a, being treated like an infant is a problem. Being treated like a woman is not, just to be clear in my own heart. But how many times we've spoken from the top down rather than invited people to share power. And I actually don't know anything about your experience. Teach me everything I need to know. Like, not in the sense of I obligate you to educate me, but I don't know. What do I need to know? From a place of joy, from a place of, you have something to teach me. There is so much good, or even rough and complicated, but there's so much that we can add that's just yours, and I have nothing to do with it. Yeah, it's a difficult thing for me to hear, because I'm, if you're listening rather than watching, I've been shaking my head going, it really surprises me that disability and caregiving stuff is written by men? Really? Like, so, you know, like, really?
Now, to be fair, there are some women now.
Yeah,
but,
now for sure, but like, let's do some basic sociology on that one. You know what I mean? Like, it just makes me want to laugh in the worst way. So thanks for being patient with boys like me that are learning that our voices are sometimes taking up too much space and we're not the only ones in the room.
And I'm thankful for other disciplines in our ways. So like Disability Studies has a much broader set of voices, so do queer studies, and on and on. So how can we use other voices to engage in theology? I wonder if we've talked a lot about our work and on call to our work. I wonder if we want to move to why do we say do we say when we feel like it's a fight, or why do we say when we're using our energy on anger. Um,
Mm.
so I can start. I'd say out of my love for God and for God's people, out of my hope that God can be transformative in the world and um, work for work for just relationship. And when I lose sight of that, then then I'm then it become about me rather than about what God is doing. And I say because I love a lot of people in this world that I've encountered and that I work with, that I've received mentorship from, and they see the possibilities that I see. So that's
Mm.
a bit of why I say
Mm.
I
I wish I had
did
such an, sorry,
Laura.
I wish I had such an altruistic, selfless answer because God has called me and I love God. I wish I could say that because yeah, maybe it's in there somewhere.
I don't always feel that way.
I feel a lot
Some
like my answer
days,
feels so much more selfish, but the truth is like, why do I do what I do? First of all, I do it because I'm angry, because the church
yeah.
needs to grow up and do better. I do it
Amen.
I do it because I owe it to my son and my son's memory. And I owe it to people like my son who are living these challenged lives because the church is not a safe place for them. I do it for the 30-year-old version of me who was lost and confused and walked away from the church because they completely and colossally let my family down and let my son down. Like I do this work for for all of these reasons, and sure, maybe God's there somewhere. Sorry, I feel like, you know, I'm blasphemous here, but I do it because I
also do it because I need something to do, and hopefully one day I will find a job that supports my life. So
and I think I do it
Yeah.
at some level, and I'm privileged that I can do this. I own that, but I do it at some level because I can't not do it.
Mm.
I just don't know how to not do it. And
Mm-hmm.
this seems to have become a very good place for my energy. And I just feel deeply grateful that the opportunities have become available to me to sort of give some direction to my anger and my energy. And yes, what that has meant is that I have at some level reconciled with God and the church.
see.
I was just thinking, I think it was Leonard Cohen, right? That's how the light gets in.
Yeah.
And I, sometimes what happens to me, I'm listening to, because theology for me is also a special interest. So there's definitely a piece of, I don't know how to do anything else. And oh, Lord, be kind, because I need to support my life. You know, so if I can't get ordained, can I please write books that sell well enough that I can contribute to my household? But so over the years, like I've been taught different models of theological reflection. And I remember sitting there with a good friend of mine, and we looked at each other, and she's this cranky Welsh Anglican woman who doesn't suffer fools gladly and has a very warm heart. And we looked at each other and go, this confuses us. And she said, well, the reason why we're having so much trouble with this procedure is because we just run theological reflection all the time, like 24/7. So I say that to say this: when I'm listening to the stories, unbidden, what came to me, Laura, when you were sharing about maybe God's in there somewhere, what came up for me is we believe in the communion of saints. And so all of these people, you know, I wrote a poem that I presented to Generous Space, and it was two pastors. It was Dear Pastor. And the last few lines were, so if this is true, that I hear the same Jesus that you do, oh pastor, why do you write and why do you read books that kill queer teenagers? And I think I too have the Spirit of God. And I sat down. So one of the reasons I do the work is because there are so many people that it's a life or death thing. And the church has been shitty, and the church has failed, and the church sometimes sits there, people whose faces I can see, not usually, but sometimes, people whose faces I have in my head have been smug assholes about people that I love. This is not acceptable. And yet to call myself a theologian in the Eastern tradition, which I think for me explains part of my reluctance, the Eastern Church has two theologians, in the sense of people that when they say Saint so-and-so, the theologian. And what they mean is this person was also clearly a mystic. So if you are not clearly a mystic, how dare you call yourself a theologian? And so it's like there's a certain extreme humility and discomfort with reluctance to call yourself a theologian in the Eastern tradition. But I'm like, I think I am a mystic. You know, I'll never be recognized, but like I encounter God. But yeah, the communion of saints is really important to me, and I engage partly because the church can do much better, but also, and I want a paying job when I grow up, but also that, and I've said before, I think Jesus is beautiful. And I think what he teaches is beautiful and liberating. And so, you know, the evangelicals, they introduced me to Jesus, and then I find out that he's a radical badass. Okay. And the Pentecostals, they introduced me to the Holy Ghost. Hallelujah. And she's a shit disturber. She is not well organized, and she is not interested in propping up human bullshit. And so all of a sudden I take the Godhead seriously, and all of a sudden I'm in exile from my own people because what I'm hearing does not at all match what they say I should. Okay, but I stay because, you know what, church? We can do better. We really can, because God is real. Jesus actually smells really good when you get him right. People want, I don't mean this in a colonial way, but even if people don't want to become institutional Christians, God help us, most people I encounter are attracted to the figure of Jesus, even if they don't want to become an institutional disciple, because there's something badass and that just smells good in the way that he treated real people. And I want to be like that when I grow up, and therefore I write theology. Sermon done.
That was like, I was just gonna say Robbie is theologizing. I love it. That's great. Thanks, Robbie. How do I follow that? For
Pressure.
me,
Like yourself.
yeah, yeah. For me, I think I stay because of some of the things that Robbie said. I stay because I feel like the church is my home. I remember I was helping to teach a class. Oh, isn't doing a PhD just a blur? It was the winter semester that just passed, and one of the students said, when we were having a discussion, we asked this whole question of why do you stay in religion came up, and one of the students said, I stay because it's all I know, and it's too hard. It's everything that I do, from the way I dress to the way I eat to the way my family's organized, is organized around my religion. And if I leave, it's going to be too hard. I don't have the energy to go, and I guess it would be like leaving a partner and trying to date again and do the whole thing over again. It's just, it's too hard, too much for me. And I thought to myself, you know, is that true for me as well? I don't know. I had to really sort of sit with that for a while. And I think there is some of that with me. There's the familiarity. There's the way that I was raised. There's the way that my family is, and those kind of things. My partner is from a different faith tradition, but I feel like I have deep roots in Christianity that I don't want to rip out. I'm not ready to rip those out. I want to stay. There's something for me there there's a longing there to keep connecting with other people who are Christians, whether they're my type of folks, they're more the badass Jesus kind of people, or they're the more traditional kind of, this is the way it's always been, let's keep doing it that way. I also wonder if I want to be a part of making more space for people who are like me, who've struggled with mental health, whose families have struggled with mental health. I want to bring the conversation that Mad Studies and Mad Activism is talking about, and I want to bring that into theology in some way, and like get them to talk to one another, because not a lot of that has been going on. And I don't fault theology for that. I just think Miriam and I always talk about how theology is always behind. Behind. It's like we're always catching up to what other people are doing. I don't know why that is. And if some of our listeners want to posit why, please tell us. If somebody wants to write an article about it, please tell us. Because I don't know. I don't know why we're always behind. It's like we're always trying to catch up. It's like culture moves forward, and then, you know, a couple years later we decide to write a paper on video games or whatever, you know, like it's just for, oh, now we're cool because we're talking about TikTok, like those kids, all the kids are doing, you know. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I wonder why we're always talking about. Anyways, that's another podcast.
I would love to write one of those articles.
Okay, all right, Robbie. Yeah, there you go. And I think the other part of why I stay too is because I've met a lot of really beautiful people since I sort of like, I don't know if I want to use the language of left the church, but I took some time away from myself to heal from some of the wounds that I had from growing up from the church. And I needed to figure out, you know, do I want to stay? And my decision has been I do. But the question now for me is, what will that look like for me? And I'm still trying to figure that out. I feel like I'm still at the point in my life where if I went into an organized religion church type thing, I'd probably have a panic attack. So I need to be gentle with myself on how fast I'm going with these kinds of things. And again, thank God for my therapist. And my life rhythm is like, I'm like a snail, but like a senior snail, like a really old snail lady. With everything that I do, I'm very slow. So I'm sure I'll get there, but it may not be for a while. Yeah, and lastly, I might say, I wonder sometimes about the concept of doing some reparative work backwards. I see that there's some, yeah, I see that there's some repair that needs to be done in my heart or spirit, for in ways that I've been hurt by the church and by people who may have misunderstood some of my ways of being, or some of my things I was interested in pursuing, or some of my questions. And for those people who've grown up in conservative churches, you know what I mean when I say some of my questions, because you're not really supposed to ask. You're not supposed to ask the tough questions, and it's shameful to doubt, very shameful, because it shows that you don't have enough faith. And I'm not saying that's correct, but that's what I grew up with. So I'm interested in doing healing work and some repair, and some of that shitty theology, and also on some of those wounds. So yeah, I don't think I could do that without remaining connected with people like three of you and other people who I've met in the past maybe 10 years. So I'm very thankful for all of you here today.
Yeah, I don't think I could be here without supportive people like you, like other mentors in my life who find power in my story even when I do not, or even when I think it's ridiculous. But and I'm aware of our time now, and I want to move us to our final thoughts for today. I'm gonna change the question a wee bit and say, what are your hopes for these conversations? And what are your hopes for listeners or viewers to take away from, or to think about after, if we're giving out homework that we won't be grading or anything, but what do you hope might come from these conversations?
I hope people can take away, you are allowed, like, as though, the way I want to phrase it is, you are allowed to say what you need to say, and grow toward that place. And I know that in my life, goodness gracious, like, please, take permission, even if a white boy doesn't give it to you. But I think, it's just it was such a powerful thing for me to sit with you today and realize again what I experience when there's a freedom that I've been growing into, because the way I put it to people, I am allowed to say everything I think in the house of God. There is actually nothing that is out of bounds, people may, like if I say something asshole-ish, racist, homophobic, transphobic, et cetera, the community will adjust me, or they should, immediately, okay? But where you are is where you are. So take courage to say the things you feel you need to say, and they might be messy, and they might be problematic, and they might be shitty theology, but we all have to start somewhere. So I hope people take courage.
I think what I would say is that the stories matter, and that your stories matter to the people who are listening. We have sat here today telling our stories and finding power in those stories and finding our calling in those stories. And so just affirming how powerful those stories are and the need to share them openly. And as Robbie said, to share them authentically, and to know that who you are and your story is valued in the house of God, but also in this community, and that we need to support each other as we tell our stories. And I think, Amy, you were saying, that the people who make it possible to stay, I know that has been a huge part of my story as well, that I stay because I have energy that has found a home, but also because people have heard my anger and encouraged me to talk about my story and had made it possible to stay, that they created space for me. And so, yeah, tell your stories, make space for one another. Yeah, that would be, I think, what I'd want to say.
And I think I echo both Lori and Robbie, and I think I want these conversations to be a place of relationship, of community, so that people see beyond whatever, see beyond the toys that are in the media or in churches about disabled folk, and say, these toys are way more complex than we have honored in churches. So, and that take time to listen to this podcast, time to engage in relationship, but that is ultimately what's transformative, I think. Amy, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, I know Miriam and I have been talking a lot lately about, both of us are PhD students, and Robbie is too. And I think in this time, we are grappling with building a professional identity for ourselves, quote unquote, whatever that is. And I think for me, I want my professional identity to include my sort of, like the superhero origin story. I'm outing myself as like a total nerd by mentioning comic books and superheroes and stuff, but I wanted to I wanted to sort of like include my origin story, because without it, this work doesn't make any sense. And I, wherever I end up after graduation, knock on wood, that will happen. I want to be in a place where I can be real and not have to hide parts of myself that are maybe messy or not perfect, or yeah, I just want to be like a real human, transparent human. So I hope that this podcast would be a part of that, and people will want to listen as we delve into different topics going forward that We want to talk about messy topics, kind of like hot topics, difficult topics, and also happy stories, good stories too that connect to madness and cryptness. So we, on that note, I think we are going to end for today. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who is here today for sharing so much of yourselves with our listeners and with each other. And I can't say exactly when we'll be doing this again, but it will be soon. So
Good.
we look forward to that.
Thanks for including me. It's always fun to hang out with you guys.
Thanks. Same.